Hi, my name is Lila Labine, and you are watching one of my free videos for common issues with sentence structure. When your sentences are clear and easy to read, your audience will enjoy your story more. They'll want to keep reading, and then they'll want to read more of your books. But when your sentences are unclear or wordy or just awkward sounding, readers are going to be less likely to pay attention to your story, less likely to enjoy your story, and definitely less likely to want to read more of your books. The first common sentence structure issue that I see is the comma splice. A comma splice is when you have what could be two separate sentences, and you've joined them by only a comma. It's technically incorrect. He loved his children. She was his favorite. However, some authors get by doing this, leaving these and not being criticized for them because they have done it intentionally. They are experienced authors and they know when a comma splice works for their writing. So my advice on comma splices is to do it intentionally, not just because you forgot that it needs to be two separate sentences or that it needs a conjunction, which I'll show you in just a second. But to do it intentionally and to do it rarely and only when it works. He loved his children. She was his favorite. Here are some possible revisions that would make this sentence structure correct. He loved his children, comma, but she was his favorite. Adding that conjunction in there, the but, that makes this sentence work. Now you've joined two independent clauses with a conjunction and a comma, and that works. The second sentence uses a semicolon instead of a period or instead of the comma and the conjunction. He loved his children, semicolon. She was his favorite. That works as well. That is technically correct. He loved his children, period. She was his favorite. Also, of course, technically correct. All of these are preferable to the comma splice, which is technically incorrect. Now, there are some times when comma splices actually might work well for the writing, and sometimes I see them when I'm doing my editing work and I will leave them, or I'll just make a note to the author, hey, this is a comma splice, but I think it's intentional and I also think it works, so I'm leaving it just so that the author is aware. The times that it works is when both of those halves of the sentence are short and very much related to each other. And it almost gives a poetic sound to the sentence. So it just sounds aesthetically like it sounds pleasing to the ear, or it just kind of works almost musically. The wind made her hair fly. Chaos seemed to surround her. So both of those are short sentence or short halves of the sentence. They're related, of course, and it just kind of reads almost like a line of a poem. And so I would probably leave that one and make a note to the author just so they're aware. I had no food for him. I had no food for myself. Here's a case where you see there's some intentional repetition, and that would also clue me in to the fact that probably the author did that, left that comma splice intentionally because they liked the way it sounded. So when you use that comma, and instead of the period, instead of the conjunction, instead of the semicolon, it gives a slightly shorter pause as you're reading. And that's why people like it sometimes. I had no food for him. I had no food for myself. Just remember, do it rarely, do it with intention, and make sure that the two halves of the sentence are short, very much related, And it works because it gives the sentence a lyrical, poetic feel to it or sound to it. Another thing I often see are expletive constructions. This has nothing to do with curse words. Expletive in this case, it just means it's a sentence that begins with there is, there are, there was, there were, it is, it was. And the reason these aren't ideal, that technically they're correct, but the reason they're not ideal is that they make your sentences kind of wordy. It's less elegant, less direct, less concise. So here's an example. It will be a fabulous night. This is technically correct. It's totally fine. But you could revise it to the night will be fabulous. It just sounds a little more elegant. But again, it's your choice as the author. But I might suggest this in a round of editing that I was doing for a client. There were several bottles of champagne on each table in the room. Possible revisions could be several bottles of champagne sat on each table in the room. Each table had several bottles of champagne on it. Either all three of those, of course, work. It's just that the second two are less wordy. Sometimes expletive constructions actually work for your writing because it almost gives it an added emphasis that you want to be there. So I didn't want to go with her, and there were a million reasons why. So there were a million reasons. It just gives it this extra oomph, kind of. And to try and reword that, it's difficult. So I would leave that if I saw that in a manuscript. Dance was my life. It was everything to me. It was everything to me. It just really gives it that emphasis. And I think it sounds great. I don't care where you were. It's the lying that upsets me. So she's clarifying. And also when we talk, so in your character's dialogue, it makes sense. You're going to be using expletive constructions more often than in the narration because people naturally talk that way. So the third common sentence structure issue is non-parallel structure. This can be hard to notice or hard to catch. You might just hear that something sounds off. So let's go over it. She wanted to dance, not watching on the sidelines. This first example is pretty obvious, but what you can do is separate the sentence. So wanted to dance, wanted to watching. You can see that wanted to watching doesn't sound correct. So you need to change it so that it works. And that would be, she wanted to dance, not watch on the sidelines. So wanted to dance, wanted to watch, or wanted to not watch. Dance, watch, not dance, watching. You want the verbs to be in that same form. They were exhausted, hungry, and made everyone around them miserable as well. So this is a list of things that they are feeling, but it doesn't work when you lay that list out. We're exhausted, we're hungry, we're made everyone around them. It doesn't work, right? So we have to revise that last one to make it fit. And here are some ways to do that. They were exhausted and hungry, making everyone around them miserable as well. So the authors separated out that last piece and kind of made it its own part of the sentence. They were exhausted and hungry, making everyone around them miserable as well. They were exhausted and hungry, and they made everyone around them miserable as well. So we created two independent clauses there. Okay, the last one is dangling or misplaced placed modifiers. So basically what these are is there are sentences that sound funny when you actually pause and pay attention to exactly what the sentence is saying. So spinning, she watched the pinwheel's colors blend together. What this sentence is saying is that she was spinning, which of course that could be true, but I'm thinking that the author is talking about the pinwheel. The pinwheel is supposed to be spinning. So we need to revise this sentence to make that clear. She watched the pinwheel's colors blend together as it spun. That makes sense. Or, hypnotized, she watched the spinning pinwheel's colors blend together. Here we know that hypnotized is describing her. It's describing she, so it's okay. And that works. Sometimes I will come across one of these types of sentences in my client's manuscript, and I actually have to leave a query or a comment for them, asking them if it's intentional or not, because this will depend on, okay, so let's read the sentence first. Exhausted, he tucked his daughter into bed before heading back downstairs. This works if if the author is talking about he, maybe the father, being exhausted. Then this works and it makes sense. However, if I would leave a question on the manuscript saying, are you talking about is the father exhausted or is the daughter exhausted? Because if it's the daughter, then this doesn't work and we need to revise. He tucked his exhausted daughter into bed before heading back downstairs. That's what you'd want to use if it's the daughter who is supposed to be exhausted. If it's him, you can leave it as the first, or what I think might even sound a little better is he tucked his daughter into bed before heading back downstairs exhausted. But either of those work. So it just depends on who in the sentence the author was talking about. So how are you going to find the awkward sentence structure in your manuscript? You're going to read your writing out loud. When you're doing these rounds of self-editing, especially when you're trying to find awkward sentences, read your manuscript out loud. And don't focus on the storyline during this round. Read slowly so that you can watch out for these sentences that could definitely confuse or annoy your readers. And then pay attention to any beta reader feedback you get. Of course, beta readers are there to tell you how much they like the story, to tell you which characters they loved, which characters they thought just didn't work, where the story moved too quickly, where the story moved too slowly, all of that. And beta readers are not editors. In your list of questions that you give them, ask them to point out any sentences that were confusing or sounded weird or off, or that they had to reread in order to understand. That will help you so much, especially if more than one beta reader points out the same sentence. Then you know, okay, I need to revise this. While meaning and purpose may be shrouded, readers shouldn't have to guess that a car has crashed, a couple has broken up, or a murder has been committed. They shouldn't have to read and reread to make sense of a passage or a scene. So I like this quote a lot from The Magic of Fiction by Beth Hill. And while it might be talking about story level stuff, I think it makes just as much sense with paragraph and sentence level editing, because you just, like I said, you don't want your readers to have to reread a paragraph because they didn't quite get it or quite understand, or it sounded weird. That pulls them out of the story. And then if that happens enough, they want to put the book down maybe. I have a blog post on sentence structure that might be helpful. It's very similar to this free video, but it might be helpful to see it written out. There's also a great book called Woe Is I, The Grammarphobe's Guide to Better English in Plain English by Patricia T. O'Connor. It's a great book, but I recommend getting one of the more recent versions, because the one written in the 1980s is going to be language changes and the conventions of grammar change, and what might be considered okay now maybe wasn't considered great back then. So you just want to, when you read material on grammar and sentence structure, and like what's okay and what's not okay in books, make sure you read current material or recent material. And then How to Avoid or Fix Repetitive Sentence Structure is a fantastic blog post by Sandra Girth. If you like this video, I have others free on my website. And if you like those and you feel like my way of explaining things or my teaching style works for you, come back in October and consider purchasing one of my mini courses. They'll be on these topics here: point of view, internal monologue, action beats and dialogue, consistency and authenticity, cutting repetition, and fixing redundancy. And I'll have more in the future. But they are basically more in-depth versions of these free videos, and they should be very helpful if this works for you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope it helped you, and I wish you the best on your writing.